Hello and welcome everybody to this evening's very special fireside conversation on the topic of the importance of cultivating sensitivity as coaches with our esteemed guest, Jules De Vitto. I'll introduce Jules in a moment, but before we get into the details and the hot conversation that we have planned for this evening, let's take a few moments just to come around the fire, since this is a fireside conversation. Before you start to imagine taking your place by our campfire, first tune into your body, coming home to yourself. And a way to do so would be to tune into the sensation of your breath. And just take a few moments to feel the in and out breaths as they come and go. Dropping awareness into the abdominal area. Feeling your belly being moved by the breath. And then allow your awareness to expand beyond the belly and to feel into the entire volume of space that your whole body occupies. And as you begin to feel your body as a whole, notice the support of the seat or the surface where your body is resting today. And below that, bring into awareness Earth, this exquisite planet that is home to us all, which sustains each of us. Connecting deeply into the earth through your whole body. And remembering the breath, you might allow awareness to expand throughout the atmosphere around Earth, the air that we all breathe. And notice how this breath of life is experienced in you and beyond you. And now, coming from the beyond, you can begin to imagine. Coming through the trees in the wilderness to the light of a campfire in the middle of a meadow. Perhaps it's dusk, the late evening light. And you might notice the flames of the fire reaching high into the evening sky. As kindred spirits emerge from the wilderness and we make our ways to the fire. Take your place and notice each other as faces are illuminated by the light of the fire. We notice each other. We come into presence with each other, forming a circle around our source of light and warmth and safety. And as we're seated here by the fire together, I'll take this opportunity to introduce our fireside conversation partner today, Jules De Vitto. Jules has an MSc in transpersonal psychology, and she is a certified transpersonal coach, as well as an experienced educator. She is passionate about guiding highly sensitive people to navigate emotional overwhelm, step into their authentic power, and align with their true purpose in life. Jules has recently published a peer-reviewed case study report in Volume 2 of the Transpersonal Coaching Psychology Journal, which is due to launch in September. And her report was on the topic related to today's fireside conversation, exploring open awareness within transpersonal coaching for highly sensitive people. Jules, what a pleasure it is and an honor to have you with us around the fire today. Hello.
Hello, thank you so much, Jevon. And it's lovely to see everyone.
Good to have you with us again, Jules, exploring this very compelling subject, which I know is very dear to your heart and something you feel called to do. Indeed, it is your coaching specialization, so we're very privileged to have you with us. And so if I may, I'll ask the first question, and I have a few prepared questions, but anyone in the live session today is welcome to ask a question at any time. And Jules, what do we mean by cultivating sensitivity?
Yeah, thank you, Jevon. And I think the first thing I want to say is that even though my speciality is working with those that identify as being highly sensitive, so it's believed that around 20% of the population, or 1 in 5 people, are highly sensitive. And the research shows us that actually that percentage is much higher in coaches and therapists. So around 1 in 2 people who are therapists and coaches or seek out coaching and therapy are likely to be highly sensitive. However, today, this topic of cultivating sensitivity applies to everyone. So whether you identify as being a highly sensitive person or not, we all have this ability to cultivate sensitivity as coaches and practitioners. And really, it's referring to this ability to know through other ways which are not always linear or rational or through cognition. So I'm really inspired by this concept of other ways of knowing. There's a paper by William Broad, which some of you might have come across. It's called Seeing with New Eyes. And he speaks to this idea that we know through many different modes of perception. And so really, as coaches or practitioners, it's important for us to tap into all of these different modes of knowing when we're sitting with our clients. And we'll come to speak more about how we do this as transpersonal practitioners, but really it's about moving beyond this more limited mode of perception and tapping into what often emerges in the unconscious or the collective unconscious. And so again, I can speak more to that and how, as practitioners and coaches, it's really about how we hold the space in sessions. And often it's about letting go of this idea of doing and coming into this sense of being, how we're being with our clients. So when we're being in a very mindful, present state, we can tap into all of these other ways of knowing. So connecting with somatic sensations in the body, visceral sensations, or perhaps images that can arise. And yeah, I can speak more to that as well, but it's really about how we use all of our senses at the same time and how we can help our clients to do that as well and help them to realize that they actually have access to a whole range of information and insights that can come to them in their sessions.
Thanks, Jules. I'd like to ask a question on behalf of people watching the recording later on who are not already in tune with this concept of high sensitivity, who may indeed, as clients, come to us as coaches because of their sensitivity-like issue. They may be sensitive in certain situations. They may be emotional, perhaps over-emotional, they may say, or they may easily be startled or overwhelmed. And they may see sensitivity as an issue. Is that
Right.
the type of sensitivity we're talking about here, or are we talking about a different quality of sensitivity?
Yeah, it's a different quality. So I would say that's one of the biggest myths or misconceptions when it comes to sensitivity, because sensitivity isn't synonymous with being overwhelmed or being fragile or being broken. Yes, that can sometimes be an experience. And as you said, that can often be why a client comes to a session. Yet the sensitivity we're talking about is actually a deeper sense of presence and clarity that can emerge for us as practitioners and coaches. So it's actually more about discernment and our ability to notice all of the different emotions that are present for us and all of the different sensations in the body and the thoughts, which, yeah, for a lot of people can feel overwhelming. And that's why they come to the coaching. But when we can, again, help them to come into an open state of awareness, and when we do the same and sit with them in sessions, we can really help our clients to find clarity and make sense of their experience and make sense of the different emotions that are present for them so they don't feel overwhelmed by them or overwhelmed by the somatic sensations in the body as well. So I would say the sensitivity we're talking about today is really about discernment, how we discern the different emotions and sensations that are present for us.
That sounds really useful. So my obvious next question will be, how do we go about being able to discern? Is there a skill set or something we can do as coaches, perhaps as the clients that we're working with, so that we're able to discern and really access these other ways of knowing? Because that sounds really compelling. I'd like to know to what extent that's useful, to be able to sense and actually come to know something through other channels, other than our usual kind of cognition and ways of thinking about things. But as you put it, through bodily sensations, feelings, thoughts, imagery. And you know, I've lifted a quote from your recently published journal case study report, in which you write, open awareness allows for unconscious material to emerge through bodily sensations, feelings, thoughts, and imagery, enabling access to other ways of knowing, which are pertinent to the client's coaching process. So my question then is, how does open awareness, and is there a practical way to go about this achievement of open awareness that enables clients to access these other ways of knowing? And then, of course, how will these other ways of knowing be useful to the coach and to the client?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say, first of all, as coaches or practitioners, the most important thing is that we're entering the session in a very grounded, mindful state. And then with our clients entering into open awareness. So it is through open awareness, as mentioned in the quote that you just shared, we're really able to tap into these other ways of knowing. Because when we're in open awareness, we're in a very embodied space. So we're very connected to the sensations that are emerging in the body. And when we're doing it with our clients, we're helping them to tap into those very subtle sensations, but not only the sensations that are occurring in the body, we're helping ourselves and the client to tap into the space around the body. So the liminal space, the space in between. And it's in that space that a lot of the unconscious material is arising, or material from the collective unconscious. And so often, I can speak from my personal experience, when I'm in open awareness, and my client is as well, I'm very visual. So I tap into images. Images can arise for me in the sessions. I also get quite a lot of somatic sensations in the body. And that's an example of another way of knowing. And I can reflect that information to my client and ask my client if that is resonating with them. So if I have a particular image, I might say, oh, I had this image arise for me. Is this something that relates to your experience? Or I might reflect, I'm having some tightness in my chest area or around my heart center. Is that something that's also present for you? And how does this relate to your experience? So this is actually an example of somatic countertransference. So it's information which is often valuable to the client, and we're tapping into that when we're in open awareness. And I think it's also really valuable for us to, I mentioned this in the first question, but often we can get really caught up in our ego and caught up in a sense of what's going to happen in the session, or what question should I ask next? Or yeah, a lot of doing, a lot of thinking, a lot of working from the ego, from the mind. And it's my experience that, again, when we're in a very embodied, mindful presence, in open awareness, we're going beyond the ego. We're not getting rid of the ego, but we're able to access information that isn't limited to our egoic knowing. So I find that's, yeah, invaluable for our work as coaches. And I know you asked another question, Jevon. You might want to remind me of the questions, because I'm talking and gone off on a tangent.
And a useful tangent it is. And just to extend your tangent, if I may, you've just spoken to how this quality of sensitivity through the means of open awareness is a useful resource for the coaches. But coming to the client now, I can imagine that the same applies, where clients perhaps are experiencing an issue. That's what they've come to coaching for, because their ordinary way of thinking about how to resolve that issue is not bringing an outcome or a solution or a way forward that is compelling or useful to them. So then it stands to reason, I guess, that if they were enabled to access open awareness and therefore these other ways of knowing and perceiving, that they'd gain access to new potential solutions or interpretations of their experience, and with that perhaps discover a different type of response. Does that relate to what you're saying?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I was reflecting on how, again, from my experience, I find a lot of my clients, when we're in this open, embodied state of awareness, they have a lot of these aha moments. So you might be familiar with those intuitive insights that just come to you. Often they happen in those hypnopompic or hypnagogic states when we're waking up or falling asleep. And I found it really fascinating that, again, in open awareness and transpersonal coaching, a lot of my clients have those sudden moments of insight or intuition. And I believe that is as a result of being in this very embodied open state of awareness. And again, being able to access the unconscious and being able to access the collective unconscious. And those kind of insights are not available to us when we're in a more tunnel awareness, when we're dominated by the ego, and again, this more rational, linear mode of perception.
I appreciate that. Just earlier you said we're not trying to do away with the ego, but we are trying to have a broader perspective and access these other ways of knowing, in addition to respecting the needs of the parts that constitute the ego, and perhaps even focusing on addressing those needs through these other resources that become available to us. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said that, I was remembering, I know in a previous talk, I believe it was in Henny's last talk, this idea of us being vessels came up, that we are vessels in the coaching process, and we are being vessels for our clients. And this is also a theme that came up in my recent research, my case study that's being published in the next journal, that when we're in open awareness, we're able to connect with our clients' process, connect with their emotions and what's going on for them, but not absorb it, not take it on and hold it. So this relates to being sensitive. Often a lot of people come to me because they talk about being too sensitive and absorbing emotions or energies of other people. But actually, when we're in open awareness, in transpersonal coaching, we're able to connect with those energies and emotions, but instead of holding on to them or letting them overwhelm us as practitioners, we can allow the energy and emotions and insights to move through us and actually transform. So that's something I believe really strongly in. I believe as coaches, that's part of what we're engaging with our clients. So being vessels, and also the actual container itself, going beyond ourselves, is a vessel. So it works on a few different layers or levels.
Yeah, Jules, this concept of being a vessel and holding the space for the client in that way is, of course, a hallmark of transpersonal coaching. Others may have the concern that when we're taking that approach and connecting so deeply, enhancing our sensitivity with the client, and the client is processing perhaps some heavy material, that there's an issue there of boundaries, and to what extent we may be picking up on things we don't want to be picking up. I wonder if you can speak to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few different responses I want to give to this question. One is boundaries are important. So in terms of having time boundaries, ethical boundaries, physical boundaries, we do need to respect those boundaries when we're working with our clients, and emotional boundaries too. So obviously it's a professional relationship. So I believe it's really important to honor those boundaries. But when it comes to being in the space with our clients, as we're saying, this concept that we're creating a vessel, a container, a held space, I think it's really important to identify that we're not having these solid boundaries when sitting there with our clients. We're not building a wall between ourselves and our clients to try and protect ourselves. But actually, the boundaries become more fluid and flexible. And as I just said, I think when we are in a very mindful, embodied, open space, we have this discernment. So we can discern what emotions and energies are ours, what emotions and energies are in the space, and which ones are coming from the client. So when we have that discernment, we have a choice, we have an ability to decide what to do with that material. And so in that way, we don't need to hold on to it. We don't need to absorb it. We don't need to carry it. We can actually work with it and help our clients to work with it. So I think that's a really important distinction to make. And also, I'm a really big fan of rituals. And at the beginning of a session or at the end of the session, whether I'm working online or in person, because I also work with Reiki and energy, I'm very conscious of the energetic field as well. And I do cleanse the space. And I think that's a nice thing for all of us to consider. What is a ritual you can do to open the session? So opening the held space and then closing the session or closing down the space. So I often use things like incense, Palo Santo. Now, if that's something you don't relate to, it could be as simple as opening up your notes for that client and then closing the notes. That's a ritual in itself. And then, of course, the practice of open awareness or a mindfulness practice before you go into the session or at the start of the session with the client. So I believe all of those things are really important.
Thanks, Jules, for reminding us of these simple skills and rituals that we can engage in to optimize our own state for the session, to access our sensitivity. And of course, it's just as simple when guiding or helping a client to be able to do so too. And of course, what we understand in transpersonal coaching is when we approach holding the space through opening the aperture of our awareness, utilizing rituals, intention to connect deeply with the client, to be of service. These intentions, practices, and rituals bring about a quality of presence that I believe in and of itself promotes healing and enables the client to access more of their own healing potential. And so when we're sitting sometimes silently or just reflecting with the client, following their process, reflecting back, it seems as if they receive a huge amount of value just from that. And we haven't even begun to apply any other coaching technique or process other than merely holding space in that manner. I guess sensitivity and that approach to holding space are really two parts of the same coin. Or do you have any further comment there?
Yeah, absolutely. So similar to what I said at the beginning, I believe it's really important to shift into more of this mode of being. How are we being in the sessions rather than what are we doing? Because as you said, when we're really holding the space, we're coming into this spiritual resonance or this empathetic resonance with our clients. And I also believe that's where the most profound healing and transformation takes place. And I would really encourage all of us to actually slow down in sessions and try to become less concerned about what questions we'll ask next or filling the space. So actually, I find space and silence is really powerful. And again, it is in those moments where there is silence. And sometimes it can feel like a long period of silence when you're sat with a client who is struggling, but that's where the transformation takes place. And again, that's a time where perhaps instead of worrying about what kind of model you're going to use or what kind of question you're going to ask, you can come back into a grounded, open state of awareness. And when we do that, our clients naturally enter into that same state as well. So I would say slowing down, having lots of space in our sessions is really, really powerful.
And it would seem as if your clients are having that kind of experience too, Jules. There's a quote from one of the clients that you included in your case study where they said, I experienced something sort of as coming home to myself. It's as
Mm.
if I was able to connect with myself rather than being consumed by my thoughts or the energies of the world around me. That's just profound. A client that in a single session has that quality of experience, and I assume learns how to access that type of state by themselves beyond the session is a very meaningful session for the client and a profound gift that they
Mm.
come away with. So
Yeah, and again, it reminds me of the importance of integration and how what I find so powerful about the work we do as coaches and transpersonal coaches is I find my clients are really able to embody and integrate these ways of being in the world after the sessions. So it's not limited to the session and it's not limited to that hour or 90 minutes we have together, but they do walk away with the clarity and the ability to relate to the world in a new way. And yeah, whatever their struggle is, able to engage with that in a different way as well. So the integration of these states and ways of being is, yeah, really important and something I've experienced from the clients I work with.
that's amazing. Yeah. I've had clients ask in the past, this is my situation. And, the manner in which they describe the situation, it's a complete dilemma. There's nothing that they can do about it. They're completely hopeless, helpless, and stuck in something. And then the question is, so what can coaching possibly do for me? And building on what you've just said, my response is quite often, I don't really know what the coaching is going to do for you. But what I am confident about is that it's going to bring you into deeper contact with yourself, your
Right.
other ways of knowing, in your words today.
Mm.
And in this broader perspective, other ways of knowing, perceiving, you're going to discover something that is meaningful to you. And who am I to know what that might be? All I know is that it's worth giving it a shot. And when they do make that investment, then invariably they get that quality of value at very least. We're talking about non-doing. We're just talking about being a
Mm.
presence with the client and working sensitively in this way. And from that by itself, they're receiving this quality of value. So I think this really speaks to a fundamental skill and approach, perhaps even an attitude that we as coaches can bring to the sessions that
Mm.
is really, really useful.
Yeah, and just to add, I've had clients that recently or in the past have, in the beginning, felt frustrated with this sense of being rather than doing. I often get asked, so yeah, how long will this take? Or as you just identified, they want us to give them the answer or the solution. And I think it's good for us to really trust in the process and trust in the sense of knowing how powerful and profound our state of being is in the sessions. And when we really trust in the process, our clients will eventually trust as well. And then, of course, experience the transformation. But I just wanted to mention I have had clients in the beginning feel frustrated because perhaps they're not used to this concept, the concepts that we speak about. Other forms of coaching can be more goal orientated or more ego focused. And again, we're not saying we're getting rid of that. We're just saying we're going beyond that. So it's also okay to sit with any confusion or frustration that might come from clients.
Yeah. And of course that frustration becomes useful
Right.
fuel for the process. Sit with that, heightened sensitivity, tune into what that really is and what it's trying to convey to the client, and they may very well come away with an insight which, had they not have sat with that experience that arose through the coaching, they would never have had if they just stayed up here in the headspace, thinking about it the way they might ordinarily do.
Something that I was curious about. So you've talked about the client integration of what happens in a session, and I was wondering if you ever advise clients to have some time after the session, because what I've noticed after some of the peer-to-peer sessions is that you're left with this ever of otherness, which if you have to go off and rush off and do something can perhaps be kind of disturbed a little bit. So I was wondering if you advise people to save some space at the end of their session to really sit and let that land.
Yeah, good question. So I do. In the session itself, I always recommend, especially if you're working with more sensitive clients, to give a bit more space at the end for integration, to sit with the client and talk about what's unfolded in the session, their next steps. So all of those practices that we know to use. And then I do recommend with my clients that they take some time for journaling, going for a walk in nature, yoga, whatever their practice is. So I won't tell them what to do. I will suggest whatever they resonate with to help with integration or to help to stay connected to the body, not go too much into the mind, for them to do that. And I find a really good one is journaling. So I will say to my clients, if possible, to keep a journal and a record of what we're talking about in the sessions and what's unfolding, especially if I'm working with them over a period of time. But yeah, if possible, just to take some time to ground, stay in the body and not rush into their day-to-day life. But I know it's not possible for everyone. So it's dependent on the client. And if they don't have time to do that, like I said, I'll give a bit more time to it within the session itself. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you ever so much.
Henny, over to you.
Thanks, Jules. I would love to let's go back to what you were saying in the beginning about the various ways in which people in general, particularly sensitive people, but also us as coaches, other ways of knowing. And you mentioned some sort of well-known mechanisms, I suppose, like visualization and like sensations in the body. But it also occurs to me that sometimes we don't know for sure. You know, it's like an intuition. We're not quite sure. Perhaps if we could break it down, we could specify where it came from or what this corresponding sensation was. But sometimes it's almost below the surface, which is still okay. We don't necessarily need to know the exact mechanism through which our intuition communicates. But why I was asking this, something just occurred to me that I'd never realized before as part of my process, my coaching process. Yes, I form images very easily. I do that all the time. And yes, I feel sensations in the body. But I've just realized something else that my psyche does, and I didn't even realize it. Words. When I hear words, when my client speaks the actual words, I sometimes see the words, as strange as this might seem, and I see them almost in 3D in my mind's eye. And they make shapes. The actual words make shapes, and they take forms, and they develop shadows, and they develop sort of, I don't know, openings. And I've never realized that actual structure of the language in between the words is almost like a mechanism through which my intuition is actually speaking to me. Does that make sense to you?
It does. Jevon shaking his head. Yeah, it does, and I find that fascinating. And I don't have that experience personally, but it reminds me of how I have a lot of images and somatic sensations. I often get tingling down my spine. And for a long time, I used to, when the client is saying something that's quite emotive or significant, I'll have a sensation down my spine. But I used to ignore that. I used to think this is not important, or it's not, it's not, I don't have clarity on what that means, so I shouldn't listen to it. That was my belief before. But now, even if I don't know where that's coming from, I know it's important to listen or observe that information and reflect it back to the client. Even if we're not clear on what that means or where it's coming from, we can offer that information and use that information and see how that information transforms or evolves the process. So I find that fascinating, that's your experience.
Yeah, Henny, thanks for sharing that account. I shook my head when you asked the question, does that make sense to you? And I shook my head on purpose because no, it doesn't make any sense to me. But something about it is compelling. Something about it feels right. So I don't need it to make sense to me. If I transfer this concept to a coaching encounter with a client, I don't need to make sense of the client's issue. All I care about is that they were able to make sense of it on their terms. I don't need to make sense of it. The more I try to make sense of it, the more I start to get up in my head space and think about analytically what the meaning of this or that could be according to my map of reality or the model or framework that I'm attached to. And that's where it goes wrong. So releasing that temptation, staying present with the client, listening to what's behind the words. I'm not trying to make sense of it, but continue to hold space. Back to the original practice of being a presence in which the client feels heard, held, safe. And then reflecting, as Jules has suggested, and what does repeating back the client's words that mean to you? And that offers them the capacity, Christina, speaking to your question again, to change their perceptual position. What does that mean to you? And we offer opportunities for the client to change their perceptual position, the position from where they are witnessing, experiencing that situation. So witness it from your belly, witness it from your heart, witness it from the other person's perspective, witness it from the perspective of a fly on the wall, witness it from the perspective of somebody in another dimension of reality, witness it from the perspective of your authentic self. And eventually the penny is going to drop. At least that's what I have faith in. Don't get carried away. The process needs to honor what's present and emerging for the client. But still, so I shook my head. No, Henny, that doesn't make sense to me, but I'm glad to hear it makes sense to you and that it's meaningful. Great. I celebrate that with you.
Yeah, and that reminds me how we always want to stay client-centered. And of course, it's valuable to stay connected to what we're experiencing. That's what we're talking about here, yet for us to not get consumed or lost in our experience. And then it reminds me of the importance of having supervision as well, and talking about this topic of sensitivity. If it ever becomes too much for us or confusing, or we're not sure what these images or sensations are meaning or why they're showing up for us, we can always take it to supervision and talk about it in these safe spaces. So I believe that's really important too.
Jules, thanks for mentioning supervision. I think as people who deliberately engage our sensitivity in the coaching relationship or in a therapeutic space with clients, we are going to be working at, dare I say, a high level. And because of this high level work, we need to be able to maintain that quality of presence for the client. And it's invariably going to bring up our own shadows, our own, whatever it is that we still need to give attention to in our own lives, because we offer that to the client. So we need to kind of clean this space as much as possible, be neutral, be a clean mirror that offers reflections to the client, as opposed to posing our views through that mirror. And that's where supervision comes in. Cleaning the mirror, purifying our state so that we can be that quality of presence. And it's through supervision, especially a supervisor that holds a transpersonal perspective and also considers being trauma-informed. That's another topic which we've touched on in other sessions, but not to change the trajectory. I think the supervisor should definitely honor the transpersonal perspective and come from a trauma-informed position as well, so that they can really help us to become that clean mirror. And it's never truly clean, is it? There's always work to be done. Again, pointing to the value of supervision. Here's Patricia. Would love to hear from you.
Hello.
Hello.
Good evening or morning, whoever it is. Morning. I'm curious, so I'm really enjoying this conversation very much. And something you mentioned early on, Jules, around ideally just letting whatever comes through kind of flow through us. I imagine that's both in terms of maybe our own resourcing and then also what comes through for the client. And I'm just curious, like, two things. One is kind of, what are the telltale signs that maybe stuff is kind of getting stuck in us? And then the other thing is any tips for those who are starting out as coaches on how to make sure that we really do remain this the flow and just not letting things kind of get stuck, because
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, a couple of things. I've experienced it myself. I've experienced taking on emotions because I am sensitive, and this is something I used to struggle with, absorbing, taking things on, feeling that I needed to hold them or carry them. And with my clients, that would manifest as feeling really tired after a session, or struggling with anxiety myself, or something which I didn't know where it was coming from, and then realizing, oh, I was just having a session with someone and this is what they were talking about. So I've learned to take it seriously, that first of all, we need to be in open awareness. So during the session, we're constantly staying grounded and present as to what is going on internally for us and going on in the space, and maintaining this. I often use the ground and the earth to help me. So we have the open awareness practice where we imagine being trees and there's roots going into the ground, and I can visualize and imagine anything that I might be holding is going into the earth, and I'm allowing the earth energy to transform and work with that if I do pick anything up. As I said earlier, rituals. So being really clear on opening the space, opening a held space where I'm open to the energies and emotions that are in that space, and allowing them to, allowing the client's process to connect with mine, but then closing the session down, closing that space down, and being really clear on that intention. Something else is what I mentioned, going to supervision. So taking anything to whether one-to-one or group supervision, and having my own practice too. So I think as coaches or practitioners, we all need to have our own practice. And so for me, that's mindfulness, that's Reiki, that's yoga. I'm very fortunate to be living in a retreat center, so I have access to all of these amazing resources where I can, as well as doing work with clients, engage in my personal practice. So I'm maintaining this embodied, grounded presence. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. There's a few different things there.
definitely. Thank you so much. It's really helpful.
Let's take one more question here, and Christina's got her hand up. So over to you, Christina.
Yes, hi. I quite resonate with Ernie when he mentions that sometimes the clients, they say their words or the expressions or whatever they don't say, that I kind of feel something that is hiding. For example, a lady comes for coaching because the husband wants her to come for coaching, and she's not being true to herself. So she's speaking words, but behind those words, there is much meaning that she either doesn't know or she's hiding from herself, where her ego is talking and she does not have a knowledge that we as coaches can perceive that. So I say, I can help you, but this is what I see, like an image, a color, a shape on the words she's saying or on the situation. So I also feel that without a word or with the wrong word, the truth is coming out on a kind of special way.
Yeah, I can relate to what you're saying, and this relates to our sensitivity as well, because I think it's really important, again, to use this word discernment as coaches, to discern what our clients are ready for us to reflect back to them. So often we can be aware of unconscious material that they're not conscious of yet, or we might be aware or tap into this intuitive sense that they're hiding something or they're not being completely honest with us. But I think we need to be careful at times to not break the rapport and use our discernment to decide whether that client is ready for us to reflect that back to them. Often it's the case that they're not ready. And if you're working with a client over a period of sessions, maybe 6 sessions, I would recommend taking a few sessions to make sure you have really good rapport with them. They feel safe, they trust you, and then perhaps you can be a bit more direct about something. But the most important thing is, yeah, that discernment and asking, is it in the best interest of the client for us to share this with them? Is this actually going to help their process? So rather than it being right or wrong, it's about asking, is it the most ethical thing to do to share it with them at this point? And there is no right or wrong answer to that. It's about discernment and our ability to trust ourselves as practitioners.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's a really crucial point you've brought into this conversation right here, Jules. That's also going to be my take-home message, to really focus on that quality of discernment, to perhaps consider how my own daily practice can enable or enhance that capacity to discern sensitively to the needs of the situation. So thank you. So I'll take this opportunity to thank Jules for sharing her wisdom and experience with us in this insightful conversation today. Thank you all, and enjoy the rest of your day or evening, wherever you are in the world. Until next time, bye for now.